Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third Agbero live webinar. And tonight we're going to be looking at finance and money and how money works and how we look after it. And we're going to be talking to some people who know an awful lot about money. And we're going to be starting that conversation with Dilys Wing. I've just asked you how to say your name, Dilys, and I've started getting it wrong already. With Dilys Wintercott. Yeah, who's from the Pathway Fund. Hello, Dilys. But we just kind of worked out, and people listening might know that the last time we met each other was when you were at the BBC, where you set up the We Move Fund, was it?
Yeah, that's right. I joined the team as advisor to the fund because Children Need made a £10 million commitment to Black children and young people. And so I joined at the latter age to help them get that money out the door, essentially. So
Right.
yeah, it was a pleasure to work with you.
And before that, you were with another one of our funders, weren't you? You were with...
Yes. Well, previous to that, because I was advisor consultant with Mission 44, so a new foundation set up by Sir Lewis Hamilton, focusing on racialised young people and access to employment. And before that, the Youth Futures Foundation,
That's right.
where very much again worked alongside you, Michael, looking at how we best invest in Black and racialised young people in areas of employment.
And so the kind of investment in the Black community has been something that you've been involved in for a long time.
It has. My career obligation really started in international development on the African continent. So I was based different countries, looking at community ownership, looking at enterprise, looking at strengthening African-led organizations. And part of that work, intersected with what's happening in Europe. Then 2020 happened, and my daughter had to have a conversation with my children, and that's where I made a commitment to look at what's happening in the UK, to look at a better society for our young people. And so that's where a lot of my work here became focused on Black and racialised communities and how to better deploy capital and gain some impact.
I came across this. I hope it forms a part of our conversation, but it's something that's just really stayed with me for the past 3 weeks, because I was listening to a podcast, and one of the things that they said in the podcast was that amongst the Jewish community, a pound will revolve around that community for 19 days. Within some Asian communities, it revolves around that community for 17 days. It did have a statistic for the kind of English community, but I can't remember what it was. But within the Black community, the Black African community and Caribbean community, it revolves for 6 minutes.
Right.
What does that mean in terms of our wealth? And, that's an incredible number, because it means that we're not spending money with each other. We don't have the ability to spend money with each other. As soon as my mum would say, as soon as you get a kwati, you give it to somebody else.
Absolutely not. Yeah, absolutely that. I mean, what we're seeing is, you're right, it only stays in our community for minutes. And what that impacts on is building wealth and keeping money and resources within our communities. It impacts on the ability of our communities to create jobs. It impacts on our communities, the ability to store money, to invest it. And also, when you look at role models within our communities, what does that impart on the younger generation, in terms of that intergenerational wealth, how to build it, how to access it, and how to, I guess, build and trust in our own communities. Also thinking about banking in terms of, when you were talking about Asian communities, there are specific banks and products for certain communities and for others, thinking about Black communities, we don't have those specialist products. And so, yeah, that ability to own and acquire assets, I would say, is really important, because that is the precursor to keeping money within our communities.
And so in order to keep that money within our communities, we have to build an infrastructure in which people can sell, in which people can buy and sell. The day after I heard that podcast, I went down to Lewisham to buy some mangoes. Yeah. And I was amazed that there were no Black people, African, Caribbean people to buy mangoes from in Lewisham. And I'd not noticed it before, but I really began to notice it then, that the fact that we don't own things means that our money, our resources always kind of slipping out of our community, and we're never able to kind of hold it in our community. But you're involved in a fund now, aren't you, which is about the building of community wealth in the Black community, called the Pathways Fund. I wonder if you could tell us a bit about that.
Definitely. And, if you're thinking about, I'm trying to get my hair braided on the weekends, and just thinking about when we go into hair shops, to buy, hair products, how many of our, Black community specifically, we're talking about Black hair products, actually own the product or own the wholesaler where you go and get your hair. It just speaks to that, there are products that we wholly buy and are the biggest consumers, but yet don't actually own that asset or that commodity. So when we're talking about owning wealth, transferring wealth, it really starts with the assets. In terms of Pathway Fund, that's one of the reasons why the fund was started. And if people don't mind, I've got a couple of slides to share. I say this because one is, it's descriptive in and of itself in terms of what the challenge is. With Pathway Fund, we launched in November 2022, and our focus is on catalysing economic growth across England, focusing on racialised communities. The reason being is, if you look at this, the kind of colour of money report by the Runnymede Trust, we can see that for every £1 that comes into a white British household, you've got 10 pence in a Bangladeshi household, in a Black African, 20 pence in a Black Caribbean. So when you look at, what wealth is being brought into the household, I mean, this is as descriptive as it gets. You can't deny the evidence, and you can't deny the impact that this will have. If you're bringing in the equivalent of 10% compared to £1, your ability to invest or spend is much greater. And with the Pathway Fund, we came out of really the need to target really wealth inequality in this country. We wanted to see a better deployment of capital into racialized communities. We want to see that capital owned and designed by our communities. We've got the Runnymede Colour of Money. We also have the Lord Victor Adewale Commission on impact investment, social investment specifically, which show that if we're looking at assets in this country around public assets for our communities, there's an equity issue. Is disproportionately not going towards our communities. For instance, there is a fund, Dormant Assets, and Dormant Assets is for public use. And what we find is, although racialized communities make up 14, arguably up to 18% of the UK population, only 2 to 4% of dormant assets have actually reached our communities. And so when you've got such a huge distortion, how those dormant assets are for charities, social enterprises, when you talk about social enterprises, real engines, the bulk of social enterprises are run by people of colour. And so when you're not even getting that investment, that's when you're seeing, I guess, real inequality, and the under investment in our communities. And so with Pathway, what we toyed with was the idea of maybe it becoming a fund, but then saw great need for structural change in terms of who is actually allocating huge investment funds. And so with Pathway, we set out to be a wholesaler. And in short, wholesaler is very similar to Better Society Capital or Access. We recognize that representation is really important. Also, lived experience, or being very close to the issues that impact on our communities. My background, I'm a child of Brent, born and raised, in Harlesden. And, no one needs to tell me what the power of community wealth building, what access to finance can actually do, and what it looks like when you're really cut off, from knowing what's out there. And so with Pathway, our vision is that Black and racialized enterprises and communities have greater and better access to finance. When we're talking about better, we're talking about financial products and services that are specific for our communities. We want to see better inclusive growth in the UK. We know that, from better representation in our labour market, the UK stands to gain at least 24 billion. Why are we not doing that as an economy when we're in a financial crisis? And in terms of what we're intending to do, we will be providing grant funding to racialized communities so that they're able to finance, fund, and grow their activities. And our focus is on community assets, land, property, the ability to get a loan. We see really these as unlockers. I mentioned the intergenerational wealth and the ability of a community to own their own property or land so that they can reinvest in themselves is a core structural issue that we really want to affect. I want to see more investment into racialized communities, more investment from, traditional grant funders, but more so, greater than that, more investment from investment houses, more investment from the different asset classes. We talk about pension funds, it's huge. And ultimately, what we would like to see is a mainstreaming, as it were, of racial equity in a nutshell, that financial services, the financial industry, all the way through to, your funders out there are seeing racial equity at the heart of what they do. And they're questioning themselves on how equitable we're being. And I'm guessing, that goes beyond the composition of your team, how many, but right through to your strategies. Did it include the communities right at the heart? The design and delivery of that strategy, as right through to the end benefit, the impact, all that being driven and led by the communities that we're here to serve. And we've had people ask, what is a wholesaler? And in a nutshell, this illustration illustrates where we want to position ourselves. We've been working quite hard over the last 2 years, and where we're aiming to be is peers to Better Society Capital and Access. We're here to invest in infrastructure, organisations, intermediaries, organisations such as yourselves, the Ubele's, Do It Now. We see our role as specifically investing in organisations such as yourselves, our organisations. And in terms of our focus, it's huge. Think about, well, where do you start? There are 2 key areas for us, and they're interlinked. Enterprise development and asset acquisition. Seeing more organisations being able to access investment, being able to develop enterprises and match trading, as well as to invest in a different sort of way, i.e., unrestricted giving. The asset acquisition I've touched on, the ability of communities to own their own assets to generate longer term impacts and community wealth. something that you can hand down and over. In terms of our activities, what that would look like, we talk about blended finance a lot. Blended being, a mixture of loans and grants. We know that, loans not for everyone. We don't advocate that everybody, changes their constitutions and start taking on blended finance at all. We know, it suits a very particular group of organisations on a particular journey. But we also believe that grant funding, there is a place for that. There's a place for that in terms of investing in organisations that are starting out, investing in unregistered organisations, as well as investing in what organisations would like to invest in. Sometimes, there is a tendency from funders, and we're really ourselves navigating it. We haven't got everything right yet. In terms of, an organisation could say, we'd like to acquire our building. A funder can typically say, well, we've got programme funding for this area of your work. I'm really interested in hearing from you what you'd like us to invest in. We'd like to invest in our own building. Okay, well, there's this programme over here, which, completely misses the mark, right? And we really want to be able to do the former, to really listen and invest in that way. And so, yeah, that's pretty much what our core focus is on. In terms of where we are now with Pathway, we are now a constituted organisation. We had set up funding from a range of investors, and we've used that to launch 3 pilots. The pilots really are their programs really to really test our thinking and to show that what we're doing works or maybe doesn't. The first pilot is in enterprise development, where we're working with Do It Now, who will be supporting 12 organisations. And with the aim of that programme was really a research question to look at what the core components were to supporting racialised organisations on that enterprise journey and different types of enterprise organisations. Asset acquisition, we are looking at community assets and what that could look like in terms of deploying capital or investing, really. Right now, we have a fund manager programme, and what that does is it's working with 3 Black and racialised led fund manager teams, because, in terms of assets, and it's the same in the States, only 1% of asset owners, wealth holders, identify as being Black or from a racialised community. And when you look at that 1%, then you can sort of see why those allocations isn't being made, or where there's a complete mismatch in the product or the understanding. With fund managers, of the 42 well-known fund managers in this country, there are more than that, but the most known ones, only 1 has a person of colour as CEO. And what we're aiming to do with this programme is to diversify, as they say, who the fund managers are, to bring more racialised fund managers into the sector. And so with the 3 teams, it will be announced next week. We were told received wisdom that there isn't a pipeline, that we wouldn't be able to find, Black and brown fund manager teams who are really strong. Now, we had a strong pipeline of 40 organisations, really strong. 11 were exceptional. And in fact, they were not first-time fund managers or emerging. They've been doing this for a while. And that actually even shows the barriers that they were seen as being first-time fund managers. And so, yeah, this programme aims to rectify that.
I can see, Dilys, why you've spent so much time in this, because I can hear your passion and the way that you kind of love to see this work as you work. I've just got one question for you before I'm just going to bring Phil in. But why? I mean, one of our directors, Philip Uday, he says that if we were funded, and this is through kind of foundations, and if we were funded relative to the percentage of us in the country, there would be billions and billions of pounds more invested in us. What's going on? Why if we're paying into this system and we pay into this system, is the resource created not coming back to us?
Yes. Oh, I mean, I point to structural and systemic inequality, really at the heart of it. The not allocating capital towards particular communities, over-representing others. I mean, it's racial inequality, in a nutshell. There's also, sometimes racialized communities are seen as risk. And we really want to work towards not even demystifying the risk, but demonstrating that, investors, you're missing a trick, because our communities are undervalued and untapped. There's a lot of potential talent that's just not invested in. But in answer to your question, it's the risk piece. It's a risk. Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to bring into the conversation Phil Tulba, and Phil Tulba manages the community wealth hub of the Ubele initiative, and it kind of feels like that there are kind of points in time when the forces of something, the forces of the world, kind of come together and say, listen, this is what we need to be doing next. And I'd like to hear about what it is that Ubele are doing in this space, and something about how the Agbero program hopes to tackle the problem that you've so kind of ably described. Phil Tulba, do you want to introduce yourself, Phil? I've introduced you, but do you want to introduce yourself again?
Yes, thank you, Michael. Yes, my name's Phil Tulba, and I'm the Associate Director of Community Wealth Building at the Ubele Initiative. So I work very closely with Michael and the senior management team, but also within my colleagues within the Community Wealth Building Hub. And at the core of the work that we do is around assets and enterprise and how we get investment funding grants into our communities. And I just wanted to draw on that point that you raised, Michael, about these resources not coming back, and Dilys rightfully talking about the systemic challenges and issues that we have around racial equity and investment. But I think part of that is also an underinvestment in our communities around capacity and resilience and ability to be able to absorb these type of investments, and also to be able to create the structures and the vehicles that can generate wealth and retain that wealth in our communities. And sort of a slight alluding to John, who will be talking a little bit more around community shares. But the point being is that we lack these types of structures that will also be able to effectively make use of. There is money out there. Dilys talked about the dormant assets fund. There are funds out there. I think part of the challenge is how intermediaries and organisations such as Ubele are invested in to be able to work within our communities to build those structures to be able to absorb and make use of that investment. It is the current context and the system that we're operating in, and there are obviously rightfully conversations around how do we actually completely reimagine and rethink this system, but the current context is that this is what we have. So what can we do, and what can organisations such as the Ubele Initiative do to build the capacity of our communities around enterprise development? We've managed the EDP program, the Enterprise Development Program, and we are now putting an alumni program over the next 12 months to continue that long tail of support for 47 or so organisations for the next year as part of that cohort. And we're thinking about how we can bring them into our system. the conversations that we've had with SIB, the Social Investment Business and Access, around the flexible finance program, and how we've been able to work with them to increase from 3% to 30% the investees into that type of social investment from Black and racial minoritized communities. And we've co-designed, we've built ourselves, designed a program called Agbero 2100, which is of course why we're all here, which is based on, you know, the research, A Place to Call Home 2015, A Place to Call Home 2023, which we launched earlier this year. And really just trying to figure out what is the Ubele way in terms of how we do assets and enterprise development support. And so that is essentially the nature of the program. We've got limited funding from the Institute of Urban Health, Propel London, and the Joseph Rowntree Community Trust. So we're building out this program, which we intend to be a 5 to 7 to 10 year program, and to work with yourselves here as a cohort, the communities that we're working with in Agbero, to invest in through masterclasses and training and one-to-one investment, and then hopefully to start building a bit of a pipeline to other forms of social investment, grant investment, other programs. So really just trying to create a system, I suppose, within a system.
Yeah, and so some people could see it as, how do we I don't know, how do we get more money to own our community centre, or how do we do these kind of individual things? But actually the thing that we're attempting to achieve is the creation of an infrastructure through which we can keep that pound moving around our community for longer than 6 minutes, you know, so that we can start spending with each other, so that we can start learning with each other, so that we can start doing all of the things that come from having more than £1 in your pocket for more than 6 minutes. Yeah. So yeah, that's good. There is a particular type of funding that I know that we've been looking at, and a particular funding infrastructure that we're interested in. And we've got John Dawson here from the Community Shares Unit, and he's going to be talking with us. Are you there, John?
Yes. Hi, Michael.
Yes.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Yeah. And so, John, do you want to introduce yourself? I've said who you are, but you might want to say something a little bit more about what you do.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Michael, and thanks, Dilys. It's been really interesting so far. Thanks, Phil. So I'm John Dawson from Co-operatives UK. Co-operatives UK is the national body of cooperative organisations, from large, massive cooperative supermarkets down to small worker co-ops, farm co-ops, and what we focus on, which is more community-based cooperatives. But at the heart of it, they all have a similar cooperative ethos of the principles of cooperation and working together. And what we work on actually is something called community shares, which is a method of both building an active movement, but also raising finance in your community. In a sort of patient way of raising patient, flexible finance. So I've put some slides up, which we can share around afterwards as well. So don't feel like you need to scribble everything down, because I might go through some of this quite quickly just to skip through some of the bits. When Ubele asked me to come along tonight, I was really excited to come, but I was thinking about the wider community wealth building agenda. I was just looking at this, reminding myself of this from CLES, which is an organisation that's thought of community wealth building a lot. And I think it just sums up a lot of the discussion we've had so far this evening from Michael and Dilys. So thinking about the economy, who owns your local economy, who owns those businesses, where does the money end up? It is about place, and it is about the assets and the land, who's owning the buildings and the assets, but also on what terms are people employed locally. Following the money, looking at who owns things, I think those are all really important. It's quite an interesting way, I think, of framing some of the discussion. But when it comes to thinking about community shares, I think it fits into that categorization quite well. So community shares as a concept, I'll come on to what they are in a minute, but they draw investment into communities. And at the heart of it, you need to effectively be an asset-locked organisation to use community shares. You need to be an organisation that's owned locally, where the money is going to stay locally. And often that's physical assets. So often it's buildings that is behind a community share offer. People are seeking investment into buildings, or it can be into a wider community-owned business, but often there's buildings there. And I've said it's not extractive because really it is about drawing local money and money further afield into a local project. Whereas often it feels in communities that businesses can be owned by private companies from outside the area, where a lot of the money just kind of leaks out very quickly from the community. So the money raised through community shares, it's long-term, it's aligned investment. By that we mean you're not just looking for a financial return, you're also interested in the output of that money. So what is the social impact of that money? To use community shares, you do need an enterprising business model underneath it. So I think it really does contribute to local economies. We know from research it's a really resilient business model. We've seen about over the last decade, we've tracked all the community share offers. There's been a 92% success rate from organisations using community shares that are still trading, which is well over double that of private commercial businesses. And underneath it, there is this democratic model. There's a cooperative model where, regardless of how much you invest, it's a one member, one vote mechanism. So it is about spreading out voice and opportunity to individuals in communities, regardless of how much money they have. And in the last decade, almost £230 million has been raised in community shares, and that's by over 165,000 individual investors. So often this can be individuals buying shares for a small amount of money, but it's about raising money from a large number of people. So it is a form of crowdfunding, but it's a form of crowdfunding where you also buy long-term ownership and involvement within the organisation. You can see from this map, this yellow map, when we tracked this earlier last year, the community shares have been used all over the UK, including buying islands in Scotland, but urban areas and rural areas as well, and for all sorts of different business models, from queer venues, cinemas, lidos, sports clubs. So a real variety of different and growing variety of different types of sector that is using community shares. Recent share offers I've just put on your screen here. We have seen a lot of community pubs in the last year or so, I think, as a result of the community ownership fund that has, for some reason, prioritised lots of community pubs. When community shares first started out, it had this perception that it was often used in more affluent rural areas, and often that tended to play into people wanting to save the last pub in their village. But it has really grown out from that in the last decade, and we have seen a real growth in that. But on your screen here, you can see a Methodist chapel on the outskirts of Leeds, the top left, that the community is coming together to try and buy and turn it into a community hub. There's various pubs there. There's a bike project. There's a whiskey distillery that's community owned in Scotland that is on to its, I think, third share offer now. Two Queens in Leicester is a arts gallery that's just about to prepare a share offer. There's a couple of community energy organisations there as well. There's a housing organisation down in Cornwall, and as I've said, a number of community pubs as well. So it's quite an active and thriving market. In terms of some recent organisations we've worked with on different ends of the scale of where they're starting out, we've done quite a bit of work with Kajans over the years in Birmingham, and Ubele's colleague, Christopher, I think you were at this session with my colleague Isla, who's in the middle there. So they have had support from us as well to explore community shares. They are interested in setting up some community-led housing, as well as a community centre that they operate. They've actually recently been awarded a big government grant through the Community Ownership Fund, which is really exciting. But they want to go down the community shares route. I think they found that it was all quite intimidating. They didn't quite know where to start. So we provided them with a bit more additional support. We went and ran a bespoke session for them. They were actually so enthused by it that a couple of the people on the screen here have actually signed up to our training session and want to become advisors to advise other people on community shares, which is really great. But they're hoping to follow in the community shares footsteps and look at a share offer in due course, which is great. We had this sports club in Birmingham that came to us that were an unincorporated organisation. They'd run for a number of years as a sports club, targeting a whole variety of different communities in Birmingham, including a lot of Pakistani and Asian families, and a lot of females as well. They ran a lot of female-specific sports sessions, particularly around hockey. So they had this big membership, and they wanted to improve their facilities. Some land became available, so it sort of all started to fall into place, and community shares felt like a good model for them, because they thought, we've got the membership there, we can tap into that and formalize that a lot more. So we helped set them up as a community-based cooperative. We provided them some advice, which led to them coming back to us for development grants, which they've now used to prepare a share off, and they're hoping to launch their share offer pretty soon to match alongside other grant funding and other investments to improve their sports facilities, which is really exciting. And then finally, this is perhaps a more common one we tend to see in terms of communities coming together to save something. In this instance, less common because it was a hardware store in Birmingham, despite being called York Supplies confusingly. And the guy wanted to retire who ran the place, but everyone loved this store. And it's the sort of place you could go and buy one nail rather than having to go to B&Q and buy 50 nails that you'll only ever use one of. So they rallied together and very quickly launched a share offer. They raised over £350,000. They also, as a result of doing that, government took them very seriously through the Community Ownership Fund and thought, wow, there's a bit of momentum here. We can see that the community backs this. So they also received a government grant through the Community Ownership Fund, and they were able to successfully buy this business from the retiring individual and have moved it into community ownership, which is now set up really for the long term, which is really brilliant. So in terms of what community shares are, we talk about them as a flexible form of raising patient investments. So they're withdrawable shares. So they're not like shares you might buy in a company where you can trade them. You can't sell these on to other people. You have to apply to the society to withdraw your money back. But they're a form of raising equity investments. And by buying community shares, you also become a member of the organisation. So your investment means that you also have a vote at AGMs, and you have a say in the future of that organisation. Community shares can offer the ability to pay interest. Some can pay dividends as well, and you will gradually get your money back. But the investment you put in, it isn't speculative, because if you buy £100 worth of community shares, they're only ever worth £100. They don't go up in value. But what you can do is you can earn interest on those. So underneath the share offer, you would have a business model that generates small surpluses that would service that investment. And why you might use them is because you might be able to go out to your community and say, we really want to set up this community project. We need to raise X £1,000. How much interest do you think you would like if you were to invest in us? And generally at the moment, we're finding if people are going to a high street lender, if they can even get investment from them, or a social lender, you'd be lucky to get much under 10% in terms of an interest rate. Community shares, it really is depending on what the community is willing to invest at. And we're seeing the interest rates on that have gone up a little bit, but we're seeing investments at the moment between sort of 2 and 6% interest. So it is a cheaper form of finance, and it is more flexible in that organizations will service that interest and pay that interest, but they often have a lock-in period for the first year or so and say, we will pay interest after this period once we've built up reserves and once we've built up the trading model. I've already said we know that it's a pretty resilient method of running an organization as well as raising finance. But our research has found that organizations that use community shares, they tend to also use it as part of a wider package. So if they raise £1 in community shares, they're often raising, on average, we found £1.18 on top of that. So that might be the community shares helps to attract in loan finance and grant finance, and they can piece together a nice package of different types of money that helps add up to a reasonable sum to achieve what the community wants. And we have also found that the stories of community shares, where people are running these very public-facing campaigns to raise community investments, they capture a lot of local and national news, but people are investing not just because they want that financial return. They're investing because they're walking down the street and they can see this community building or this community business or this service. They can touch it, they can feel it, they can kick it. Generally, they might also be trading with it. And it's something that they are passionate about, and they also want to protect and save, and they want to feel a sense of investment in that. So they're investing. Yes, maybe for some people it's about the financial return, but for most people it's about the wider social impacts and the ability to.
Yeah, so I've got a question, and it was I was wondering the same thing. How does it actually work? And so is it that somebody thinks, oh, there's a community centre or there's a pub or a shop down the road that looks as if it's going to close down, let's save it, and that you ask everybody in that community to what, contribute £1, £2, £10 towards keeping it alive?
I think you preempted my next slide, Michael.
Oh,
yeah, I mean,
sorry.
absolutely. It's a really good question. And how do they work? There are different starting points. Often it is the threat of something closing or being lost. Other times it is an existing service where people come up with a new vision of, we have this community centre, but we need an extension on it, or we want to buy it off the council, we want to buy it off this private ownership, we want to bring it into community hands. So understanding really what your starting point is really important. Understanding what sort of investment you need. Community shares are often part of a bigger financial package. But once you've got an idea of that, we really emphasize the importance of going and talking to everyone else in your community and gauging their interest in this. Is this something they would back? Are they interested in it? Would they use it? If you can evidence that, that's brilliant, because it kind of gives you the confidence to keep moving forward and think this might actually work. If that is the case, you do need to be a community benefit society or cooperative. But if you could check your constitution, we can help with this. We then would encourage people to prepare a business plan, to prepare what we call a share offer document, and then run a marketing campaign around that to raise the investment.
And so, John, are you managing? We heard earlier on the kind of minuscule amounts of investment monies that were getting into the Black community. Are you managing with this scheme to get more money into the Black community? Would you say that the percentage of your investment in the Black community is higher than in other places?
I think it's early days for us and for the community shares model and for cooperatives in general. We've started some research actually with Ubele to look into this and look into how we can help more Black-led community organisations to explore this model. We ourselves can provide grants and match investments, and we're looking to get more investment into those sorts of communities. But I think it's also a method and a mechanism for those communities to, we have this phrase of doing things for themselves. So it's a model where you can actually seek to raise your own investment from your own community, where you might be banging against a funder's door and they're not listening. Once you start raising some investment yourselves, often you find that is quite strong evidence to then take to a funder, because it's not just you trying to write a great grant application. It's you actually with live market research and evidence saying, look, people put their own money in. There's no better way of evidence demand for this service than people locally have backed in and put their own money in.
Thanks very much, John. It'd be really interesting to see how perhaps the leaders involved in the Agbero program feel as if they can access this, and perhaps we should set up a special time, a special moment or a meeting where you and them could kind of meet together to more to just explore how different. Is that happening anyway, Phil? Am I jumping the gun?
A little bit, you're jumping the gun. I mean, the research that John mentioned, I see it as a part one, which is really just trying to understand why community shares aren't, particularly attractive to our communities, why they're not being led by our communities, and particularly also the cooperative and community benefit societies type of models and structures that I talked about earlier. So that's sort of part one. What we would like to do, what I would like to do, is to be able to do a part two, where we take a cohort from our communities. They could be from the Agbero program and others, and we take them on a community shares journey with investment, organizational development funding, and potentially match funding at the end of it. So that's a part two. But certainly within the Agbero program and within the financial resources element, and within some of the organizations that get the phase 3 support, there may be some opportunity to provide some additional consultancy support and also play them into the programs that John's managing.
Thanks very much. Listen, we've only got 12.
I'll just mention quickly, Michael, on the screen, and I'll turn off. We do have support available. So if anyone is interested, we also have something called pre-grant support, which is particularly targeted at racialised communities, Black-led organisations, which provides extra additional hand-holding support. So just get in touch. We'd be happy to provide help. We've also got grants and investments we can make as well. And there's my contact details on the screen.
Thanks very much. Thanks very much, John. Listen, we've only got 11 minutes left, and we wanted Pervez. Hello, Pervez.
Good day, Michael.
Hello, Pervez. I wonder if you could introduce yourself, Pervez.
Certainly. My name is Pervez Akhtar. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Ubele. Joined the company about 4 months ago. Prior to that, I spent most of my life actually in the private sector, but the last 2 or 3 roles have been in the third sector.
And in terms of today's discussion, really, you're interested in kind of once we get some money, no matter how big or small that amount, how do we look after it?
Certainly. So my thinking really was talk about some of the key financial management skills that we need as leaders or as any organization, to be honest with you, to manage our finances in a way that we actually create a solid foundation for stability, growth, resilience, and so forth. So identified 4 areas, but I'm conscious of time, so I can send this out via Chris. But essentially, my thinking really was probably the most important first area, essentially budgeting and planning. And not just numbers, even though I'm a finance guy, I should get excited by numbers, but planning in the sense that you link everything back to your mission and vision and so forth. And again, actually, that's the starting point in a sense. And the reason for actually having a good budgeting system, good planning system, really it offers a number of advantages in the sense that it helps you to prioritize how you're going to spend the money, how you're going to spend your limited resource. The reality is we are never flush with money in the third sector. So you have to pick and choose and make some decision in terms of where our limited dollars actually kind of add more value. So it's actually helping you to prioritize the projects, align with your goals that you set up initially as part of your vision initially, and obviously as your strategic goals and so forth. So my suggestion really is in terms of how we do like a good budgeting, good planning, is start with your vision, your mission, set your strategic goal for any given period. It could be 12 months, it could be 3 years, it could be 5 years. I personally think maybe 3 years is probably enough. Beyond that, you're guessing and so forth. And then from that, you actually list a set of activities you want to do in order to achieve your mission and vision. And once you identify those activities, then you actually start to put together your income needed for that, your resource needed for that, costings and so forth, and timelines, and obviously produce a phase budget. That's the way actually we do, and historically I've done that all my life, and certainly in Ubele also. And so
I can hear, Pervez, that you've probably done that all of your life, and that you've had an understanding of money and what it is over a long period of time. Most of us, I won't say most of us because it might not be true of everybody, have always seen money as a means to an end. Can I get enough of it in to do the work that I want to do now? Or can I get enough of it in to go on the holiday that I want to go on next week? But this kind of long-term view of money is a bit alien to me. How does it help us to have this kind of longer-term view of money? than getting enough into our voluntary organizations to pay the rent tomorrow.
Sure. Look, as you said, Michael, money is always tight. That's the reality. That's the world we live in. But if we go back to our initial sets of basically a vision that we had for our organization and the goals we set to achieve that vision, essentially it could be longer term. And I'm not saying that really they have to be achieved in a short time frame. But let's say even we were to do a plan or a budget for 12-month period. Again, you will start with say, okay, what are the things that I need to do or we need to do as an organization to achieve our initial objective? So you essentially list those out, and then you say, what activities do I need to do in order to achieve those objectives? And then the money kind of gets allocated, and the cost and the people and so forth. So that really, the time frame could be 6 months, it could be 12 months, could be longer period. But I think whatever time frame we choose, the whole process actually works very, very well.
But we're talking, when we're talking about investment, aren't we? We're talking about holding money beyond the idea of what you want to do immediately, in order that you can have growth, in order that you can have development, in order that you can. And how when we're existing with really tight budgets, do we kind of build growth into our system?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question, Michael. Later on in my presentation, I think depending on time, I actually had a small section on building up reserves, essentially, to help us to achieve that. And said the reality is money is tight, and probably repeating myself, but really we need to start actually either accessing some of those funding that's available for long-term growth, or actually having kind of underspends in our project works, the money that we have, in order to build the reserve for longer term longevity and a rainy day and so forth. And the reality is, I mean, in terms of, from your experience, when you put together a funding application to anybody, it can take from anywhere from 6 to 9 months before you see the money. So you need to have sufficient resources, sufficient money in the bank to pay your bills to cover that period. So I think the reserves are very, very important. And I think it's actually a great gradual process. I mean, if you're lucky enough to receive some big bucks from maybe a nice donor, that's nice to have. But the reality is we all need to kind of struggle and save here, pinch here, and start building our reserve for longer term.
My mum used to say, Pervez, that if it's just 2 pence out of what you've got, put down 2 pence, put down something, and you're surprised by how quickly it begins to grow.
Sure.
Yeah. Phil, before we end, because again, this hour goes really quickly, you should talk to Christopher about maybe extending it. But before we go, Phil, John, Dilys, are there any kind of final points that you'd like to make?
I'm happy to open up. I think, when we were trying to pull this conversation together, what we wanted to try to do is kind of get a sense of kind of the national sort of global perspective of the context that we're in, and hence what Dilys was speaking about, and my interest was how we connect that into the work that we're doing at Ubele and Agbero, and we wanted to begin to explore the option of the kinds of structures that we could use, so cooperatives, community benefit societies, as one way of of community-owned, community-led, community-controlled businesses, as a way of generating wealth within our communities, bringing wealth within our communities, and being able to recycle that. And that's really one example. And there's other types of ways that we can, and things that we can discuss. And then with the conversation with Pervez as well, is that there are some fundamentals that we can't escape from. I know that we all want to change the system that we're operating in, but at the same time we need to set up businesses that are sustainable, that are well funded, that have very sensible infrastructure and systems that will enable them to continue providing the benefits to their local communities and build the wealth that we're looking to try to build.
Thanks very much, Dilys. One final thing. If there's one thing that the leaders watching tonight should do, in order to begin to build that kind of foundation of wealth in our community? What would you say it was?
I would say we need to come together, so we can all move together. To Phil's point about the infrastructure, I think building that infrastructure is so important. And to that infrastructure, I mean a network of organisations that are doing different things. You know, so we all come together to carve out what we do. You know, what our specialisms are, and you know, it's the sum of parts, as they say, and then come together really as a network of Black and racialized led organizations, I would say. Yeah, to leaders out there, the importance of us all coming together to develop, I would say, an agenda for our communities.
Thanks very much. We come to the end of another of our webinars. I'd really like to thank everybody. I always go into these things thinking I know what we're going to talk about. And it just kind of, as it illuminates in front of me, I kind of begin to just see how exciting this work is and how important the work that we do is, and how important the work of the people who are not talking on the webinar but listening to the webinar is. Because, you know, I just keep thinking about that penny, and unless we can turn it into 10 pence, a pound, £100, £200, very quickly, all of our aspirations begin to kind of die away. And the idea of building wealth in our community is critical. Is critical for me, is critical for you, is critical for my children, my grandchildren, for all of us. And so thanks for the work that everybody's doing. If people want to get in contact with Dilys, just Google Pathway Fund, which is what I did, and it tells you all about it. It tells you all about the work, and it tells you how to contact everyone. John's put his contact details in the chat, and everybody knows how to get hold of Phil and Pervez. Thank you very, very much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks very much. Bye.
You guys, good night.